You're used to cleaning up messes, aren't you? People like you always are. Isadora's voice dripped with contempt as she stood over Zora, who was kneeling on the floor mopping up deliberately spilled coffee. 10-year-old Elowen watched from the corner, tears streaming down her face. Maybe if you spent less time filling my daughter's head with nonsense and more time doing your actual job, accidents like this wouldn't happen. Silas Warwick stood frozen in his office doorway, finally seeing his fiancée's true nature. The woman he'd trusted with his child was a monster. That night, everything would change. But how did it get this far? How does a successful CEO become so blind to the predator living in his own home? And what kind of woman risks everything to protect a family that isn't even her own? On the 45th floor of the Chicago Biotech Tower, Zora Whitlock moved through empty corridors with her cleaning cart, the wheels whispering against polished marble. "Just one more month, Miles," she whispered to the photo in her uniform pocket. "Just one more month and you'll be okay." Each stroke of her mop was a prayer, each overtime hour bringing her closer to saving her son's life. The silver necklace from her mother caught the fluorescent light, her only reminder of better times. Silas Warwick sat behind mahogany, an obligation, his salt and pepper hair disheveled from anxious fingers. Merger documents sprawled across his desk like battle plans, each signature worth millions. Since Isadora had moved in 6 months ago, these late nights had become routine. She encouraged his work obsession, claiming it was necessary for their social standing. "Daddy, look what I drew." 10-year-old Elowen appeared in his doorway, dwarfed by the imposing office. She had been staying late with him since their babysitter quit. Isadora had made it clear that help was beneath their status. In her hands, she clutched a drawing stick, figures holding hands under a rainbow, innocent art that should have melted any father's heart. But Silas barely glanced up. "Not now, sweetheart. Daddy's working." Elowen's brown eyes, so much like her late mother's, dimmed like a candle in the wind. She retreated to her corner, the drawing crumpled in her disappointed grip. Then Isadora arrived. She swept into the office like a hurricane in designer heels, blonde hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Her blue eyes, sharp as winter ice, surveyed the room with calculated precision. "Silas, darling." Her voice dripped honey over steel. "We need to leave. The fashion gala starts in an hour and I won't have people thinking you don't support my work." Silas looked up, exhaustion evident in his features. "Isadora, I promised Elowen we'd have dinner together tonight. She's been waiting. The child will understand." Isadora's dismissal was swift, surgical. She needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her wants. Besides, this gala could secure the Hartwell interior design contract. Millions of dollars, Silas. Surely that's more important than playtime. The words hit like physical blows. Elowen shrank deeper into her corner, the drawing falling from her hands like a wounded bird. "If you don't come," Isadora continued, her voice dropping to a silky threat, "people will start wondering if you're really the kind of man who belongs in my circles. The kind of man worthy of being my husband." Silas felt the familiar weight of manipulation pressing down on his chest, but the exhaustion won. "All right, give me 10 minutes to wrap up." Isadora's smile was victorious, predatory. As she turned to leave, she deliberately bumped into Zora, who had been quietly working near the doorway. The bucket of cleaning water crashed to the floor, dirty liquid spreading across the pristine marble like spilled tears. "How clumsy." Isadora's voice carried mock sympathy. "You really should watch where you're going. Clean it up." Zora knelt without protest, her dignity intact, despite the deliberate humiliation. She had learned to absorb such treatment silently. Single motherhood had taught her to pick her battles, especially when stable employment meant affording Miles's medication. His father had disappeared when the medical bills began mounting. Some people, Isadora continued loud enough for Silas to hear, simply don't know their place. As the elevator doors closed on Silas and Isadora, Elawan remained alone, her small shoulders shaking with silent sobs. She picked up her fallen drawing, now water-stained. Zora approached carefully, understanding the fragility of a broken heart. "That's a beautiful picture," she said softly. "Daddy didn't even look at it," Elawan whispered. "Sometimes grown-ups forget to see the beautiful things right in front of them," Zora replied. "But that doesn't make your picture any less beautiful." As Zora continued working, something caught her eye, a letter that had fallen from Elawan's backpack, written in feminine handwriting. "My dearest Silas, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. Please don't let Elawan grow up alone the way I did. She needs her father's love, not just his provision. Promise me you'll be there for her bedtime stories, for her scraped knees, for all the small moments that make a childhood magical. Don't let work or anyone else steal those precious years. They pass too quickly, my love. Forever yours." Sarah. Zora's hands trembled as she read the words. This was a message from beyond the grave, a mother's final plea to the man who seemed to have forgotten his most important role. She carefully folded the letter and tucked it into her pocket, understanding instinctively that this was meant to find its way back to Silas at exactly the right moment. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about a demanding boss and a cruel woman. This was about a little girl losing her father piece by piece, day by day, just as Zora herself had lost her mother all those years ago. What does a woman do when she discovers a secret that could change everything? How far would you go to save a child from the same loneliness that shaped your own life? In her modest apartment on Chicago's South Side, Zora sat beside Miles's bed, watching her 8-year-old son sleep. His breathing was labored, each inhale a reminder of the chronic lung condition that threatened to steal him away from her. The medical bills on her kitchen table formed a mountain of impossibility, $18,000 after insurance and charity care, for the surgery that could save his life at Lurie Children's Hospital, the only facility in Chicago with the specialized pediatric expertise Miles needed. She traced the scar on her palm, a memento from her childhood days working in her mother's sewing shop. "Patience and kindness, baby girl," her mother used to say. "That's how we change the world, one heart at a time." The phone's shrill ring cut through the night silence. "Zora!" Thane Carver's familiar voice carried concern. "I need you to take on an additional assignment. Mr. Warwick's private office needs attention, and he specifically requested someone trustworthy." Trustworthy. The word carried weight in Zora's world, where trust was earned through consistency and proved through hardship. The next evening, as the office building settled into its nighttime quiet, Zora made her way to Silas's executive suite. The space told a story of success and sorrow. Family photos turned face down, a child's drawings tucked behind important documents, a wedding ring that still lived in the desk drawer like a sacred relic. Elawan sat curled in the corner again, her art supplies scattered around her like colorful prayers. The little girl looked up when Zora entered, her eyes still puffy from the previous night's tears. "Hi," Elawan whispered, barely audible. "Hello, sweetheart," Zora replied, her voice carrying the warmth that came from understanding childhood loneliness. She reached into her cleaning cart and pulled out something small and bright, a colored pencil that Miles had left in her pocket. "My son Miles loves to draw with this color. He says it makes the sun look real. Would you like to have it?" Elawan's eyes widened as she accepted the simple gift. It wasn't expensive, but it was chosen with care, given with love. Miles draws when the medicine makes him feel bad. Zora continued organizing supplies around Elawan. He says colors help him remember that tomorrow might be different. Miss Isadora says I'm a burden. Elawan confessed, her small voice breaking Zora's heart. She says Daddy would be happier if I wasn't here. The words hung in the air like poison. Zora knelt down to Elawan's level, her movement deliberate and full of purpose. Sweet girl, she said, her voice steady as granite. People don't give their most precious gifts to burdens. You are your daddy's treasure, even when he forgets to act like it. Something shifted in Elawan's expression, a spark of hope in eyes that had grown too familiar with disappointment. As if summoned by their conversation, Isadora appeared in the doorway, her presence immediately changing the room's temperature. She took in the scene, Zora kneeling beside Elawan, the colored pencil the moment of connection, and her face hardened into something ugly. What exactly is happening here? Isadora's voice cut through the air like a blade. I was just... Zora began. You were just overstepping your boundaries. Isadora interrupted, her blue eyes flashing with anger. Elawan, come here. Now. The little girl scrambled to her feet, clutching the colored pencil like a lifeline. I want this woman fired, Isadora announced to the empty air as if Zora were invisible. She's clearly trying to manipulate this family. But before anyone could respond, Thane Carver appeared in the doorway, his weathered face taking in the scene with the wisdom of someone who had witnessed too many small cruelties. Miss Vane, he said calmly, Zora is doing exactly what she was hired to do. Perhaps the question is what you're doing here, so late disturbing a child who should be getting ready for bed. The standoff lasted only seconds, but in that brief moment, lines were drawn. Isadora's mask slipped, revealing the calculation beneath her beauty. After she left, Zora began to gather her supplies. As she worked, she pulled out a small piece of paper and wrote a simple message, Elawan needs you. She left it where Silas would find it, then slipped Sarah's letter into the corner of his desk drawer, positioning it so it would catch his eye when he reached for a pen. Some messages, she understood, could only be received when the heart was ready to hear them. Minutes later, Silas returned to find the note. He read it twice, then looked across the room to where Elawan sat drawing with her new colored pencil. For the first time in months, he really saw his daughter not as an obligation or interruption, but as the beautiful, fragile, irreplaceable human being she was. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. When had he stopped seeing her? What happens when you finally wake up to find that everything you thought mattered has been keeping you from what actually does? The next evening brought new challenges wrapped in familiar cruelty. Isadora arrived at the office early, her designer heels clicking against the marble like countdown timers. She had brought coffee, expensive, aromatic, and perfectly positioned for maximum damage. Oops, she said with theatrical concern as she deliberately knocked the cup over, sending hot liquid cascading across the floor. What a mess. You're used to cleaning up messes, aren't you, Zora? The coffee spread like a dark stain across the polished stone, and Zora knelt to clean it without protest. She had learned long ago that dignity wasn't something others could take from you. It was something you chose to keep even when they tried their hardest to strip it away. You know, Isadora continued conversationally, examining her manicured nails, I've been thinking about your position here. It must be difficult scrubbing floors when you could be home with that sick son of yours. What's his name, Miles? The mention of her child made Zora's hands still for just a moment, but she continued cleaning. I wonder what kind of mother chooses work over staying by her sick child's bedside. Isadora mused, her voice carrying false sympathy. But I suppose when you're your type of person, You don't really have choices, do you? The words were chosen, carefully designed to cut deep. They carried the weight of every stereotype, every assumption about worth and worthiness that Zora had faced her entire life. Before Zora could respond, Elowen's voice cut through the tension. I spilled my juice. The little girl stood near the conference table, a plastic cup at her feet, apple juice spreading across important documents. Her face was flushed with panic, her eyes wide with the fear that came from living in a house where mistakes were met with anger. Isadora's reaction was swift and merciless. You stupid, clumsy child. She snapped, her voice echoing off the glass walls. Look what you've done. Can't you do anything right? No wonder your father. It was an accident. Zora interrupted quietly, rising from the floor with grace that contradicted her position. She moved toward Elowen, who was now crying silent tears. Accidents happen to everyone. Stay out of this, Isadora hissed. This child needs to learn that actions have consequences. But Zora had already reached Elowen, had already knelt down to the little girl's level. She pulled a clean cloth from her pocket. She always carried extras, understanding that childhood was messy and beautiful and worth protecting. Hey, she whispered to Elowen, gently wiping the tears from her cheeks. You know what my Miles would say about this. He'd say that spilled juice means you were trying to do something by yourself, and trying is always brave. Elowen's sobs quieted as she looked into Zora's kind eyes. You're not stupid. Zora continued, her voice carrying absolute certainty. You're not clumsy. You're a 10-year-old girl learning how to navigate a world that's often too big and too hard. And that's exactly what you're supposed to be. The moment was interrupted by Silas's voice from the doorway. What's happening here? He took in the scene, the spilled juice, Elowen's tears, Isadora's flushed face, and Zora comforting his daughter. But instead of seeing the truth, exhaustion and assumption colored his interpretation. Did you upset Elowen? He asked Zora, his voice carrying the weight of a man pushed to his breaking point. The accusation hung in the air like a physical slap. Zora stood slowly, her dignity intact, but her heart breaking for this family that was tearing itself apart piece by piece. I would never hurt her, she said simply. I only want Elowen to know she's worthy of love. Silas's brow furrowed confusion, mixing with guilt in his tired eyes. Something about Zora's words stirred a memory he wasn't ready to face. Later that night at Chicago Memorial Hospital, fluorescent lights hummed over Miles's small form in the pediatric ward. The doctor's words echoed in Zora's mind, 3 weeks, maybe 4. Without the surgery, his lung function will continue to deteriorate. She held her son's hand, feeling the fragility of his 8-year-old fingers, the way they trembled with each labored breath. Mama, Miles whispered, his voice barely audible over the machines. Tell me about the colors again. The medical bills stacked on her kitchen table told a devastating story. $85,000 for the specialized lung reconstruction surgery at Lurie Children's Hospital, plus ongoing respiratory therapy costs. Even with the hospital's charity care program, her portion was still $18,000, an impossible mountain for someone earning minimum wage. Zora smiled through her tears, stroking his hair with infinite tenderness. Red is for brave hearts like yours. Blue is for dreams that reach as high as the sky. Yellow is for hope, baby. Even when everything seems dark, yellow reminds us that morning always comes. What about purple? Miles asked, his eyes drooping with medication-induced fatigue. Purple, Zora said, her voice breaking slightly. Purple is for miracles, and miracles happen when people who love each other refuse to give up. As Miles drifted off to sleep, Zora made a silent promise. She would find a way to save her son, just as she would find a way to save Elowen from the loneliness that was consuming her childhood. Some fights were worth everything you had to give. How much would you sacrifice to save the people you love? When everything seems impossible, where do you find the strength to keep believing in miracles? The Fairmont Chicago ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow prisms across the gathered elite of the city's social scene. The charity gala for children's arts programs should have been a celebration, but for Elowen, hidden in her too formal dress and patent leather shoes, it felt like another performance in a play she didn't understand. Isadora moved through the crowd like a predator in pearls, her arm possessively linked through Silas's as she collected compliments and business cards. She had orchestrated this evening perfectly. The announcement of their engagement would be the crowning moment of her social ascension. "Darling," she whispered to Silas as photographers gathered nearby. "Make sure Elowen stays out of the pictures. Children should be seen, not heard, and barely even seen." Silas felt something twist in his chest at her words, but the evening's momentum carried him forward like a riptide. Elowen sat alone at a table draped in white linen, picking at the fancy food that tasted like cardboard in her mouth. Around her, adults laughed and clinked glasses, discussing art and culture with the casual authority of people who had never doubted their place in the world. "Excuse me, sweetie." An elderly woman approached Elowen's table, her eyes kind behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Are you enjoying the gala?" Before Elowen could answer, Isadora appeared like a storm cloud. "I'm so sorry," she said with practiced charm to the woman. "Elowen can be quite shy. She's not really comfortable in social situations. Actually, we've been considering homeschooling. The traditional classroom environment seems a bit overwhelming for her." The lie rolled off Isadora's tongue so smoothly that even Elowen blinked in confusion. She loved school, loved her art class, especially loved the way Mrs. Peterson encouraged her drawings and displayed them proudly on the classroom wall. "That's interesting," the woman said carefully. "I'm Margaret Thorne from the Children's Arts Foundation. We're always looking for young artists to showcase in our programs." Isadora's smile turned sharp. "Oh, how generous, but Elowen isn't quite at that level yet. She's more of a hobby artist. Nothing serious." Later, as Elowen escaped to the bathroom to hide her tears, she didn't see Isadora manipulating Silas during a brief moment when he was distracted by business calls. Using his phone while he was engaged in conversation with investors, she quickly sent an email from his account to Elowen's school, "Dear Mrs. Peterson, due to my demanding schedule and Elowen's need to focus on her core academics, we will be withdrawing her from the after-school art program effective immediately. Please remove her from the roster. Best regards, Silas Warwick." The deception was calculated and cruel, using Silas's own digital identity to isolate his daughter from her only source of joy at school. The art program was Elowen's sanctuary, the one place where her creativity was celebrated instead of dismissed. But Isadora saw it as leverage, another thread connecting Elowen to joy that could be severed with surgical precision. The evening's centerpiece came during dinner. As the charity auction began, Isadora orchestrated her moment perfectly. She accidentally knocked over a crystal glass near Elowen's place, setting the sound of shattering crystal, cutting through the elegant chatter like a gunshot. Every head turned toward their table, hundreds of eyes focusing on the small girl, who seemed to shrink into herself. "Oh, Elowen!" Isadora exclaimed, her voice carrying just the right mix of embarrassment and exasperation. "Sweetheart, you need to be more careful. This is exactly why children don't belong at events like this." The accusation was public, deliberate, and devastating. Elowen's face flushed crimson as whispers rippled through the crowd. She hadn't touched the glass, but the truth seemed irrelevant in the face of Isadora's performance. "I didn't—" Elowen began, her voice barely a whisper. "It's all right, darling." Isadora continued, her hand on Elowen's shoulder in a gesture that looked comforting but felt like a shackle. "Some children just aren't ready for grown-up responsibilities." The words hit their target perfectly. Elowen fled from the table, tears streaming down her cheeks as she pushed through the crowd of elegant strangers who stared at her with mixture of pity and annoyance. Zora, who had been working the event's coat check as part of her evening shift, witnessed the entire scene. She saw the calculated cruelty in Isadora's eyes, the deliberate positioning of the glass, the way the woman's smile never reached her eyes as she destroyed a child's dignity for the entertainment of strangers. Following Elowen outside, Zora found the little girl sobbing on the hotel's back steps, her fancy dress wrinkled and stained with tears. "Hey," Zora said softly, sitting down beside her. "Want to tell me what happened?" "She said I broke the glass," Elowen hiccuped. "But I didn't touch it. I promise I didn't touch it." "I know," Zora replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "I saw what really happened." Elowen looked up with surprise. "You did—" "Sometimes," Zora said carefully, "people break things on purpose and then blame someone else. It's not about the glass, sweetheart. It's about making themselves feel powerful." As they sat together in the Chicago night air, Zora overheard Isadora's voice from the hotel's side entrance, where she was taking a phone call. "Trust me, Marcus," Isadora was saying, her voice carrying a hardness that made Zora's blood run cold. "The child is just an obstacle. Once I'm legally tied to Silas's fortune, I can handle the Elowen situation more permanently. Boarding school, perhaps. Somewhere far away, where she can't interfere with my plans." The words were like ice water in Zora's veins. This wasn't just about cruelty. This was about calculated destruction of a child's life. Inside the ballroom, Silas had finally noticed his daughter's absence. When he found her outside with Zora, something in his chest cracked open. Elowen's tear-stained face, her defeated posture, the way she seemed to fold in on herself, it all suddenly looked familiar. He remembered another little girl years ago who had learned to make herself small to avoid her stepmother's attention. He remembered the photos Sarah had shown him of her own childhood, the sadness that had shaped her into the fierce protector she became. "Bayo Elowen," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Tell me what happened." For the first time in months, he was really asking, really listening. "What do you do when you realize you've been protecting the wrong person?" The morning sun streamed through Silas's office windows like a spotlight illuminating evidence of his failures. The crumpled drawing Elowen had left behind lay smoothed on his desk, stick figures, holding hands under a rainbow, the simple art of a child who still believed in happy endings, despite having every reason not to. Beside it sat Miles's small artwork that Zora had quietly left behind, a watercolor painting of a sunset that seemed to glow with hope, despite being created in a hospital room by hands that shook with illness. Silas stared at both pieces, seeing for the first time the parallel stories they told two children, both fighting for love, both being failed by the adults who should have protected them. "Sir," Thane appeared in the doorway, his weathered face etched with concern. "Miss Vane is here. She's asking to speak with you privately." Isadora swept in moments later, her morning perfection already in place despite the early hour. She had spent the night strategizing, understanding that last evening's scene had created ripples that needed immediate management. "Darling," she said, moving to perch on the edge of his desk with practiced intimacy, "we need to discuss the nanny situation." "Zora isn't a nanny," Silas replied absently, still staring at the children's artwork. She's part of the cleaning staff. Exactly my point. Isadora's voice sharpened. She's overstepping her boundaries, getting involved with Elowen in ways that are completely inappropriate. I won't have some woman filling Elowen's head with ideas above her station. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Something about them made Silas look up, really look at the woman he had planned to marry. What do you mean, ideas above her station? Isadora's laugh was brittle as breaking glass. Oh, Silas, don't be naive. People like her, they see an opportunity with a wealthy family, and they take it. She's probably planning to manipulate Elowen into asking you for money, or maybe she's angling for a promotion she hasn't earned. People like her. Silas's voice had gone very quiet, very dangerous. You know what I mean? Isadora waved dismissively. Working-class single mother, probably desperate. They always have an angle. The words revealed everything, the ugly assumptions, the casual cruelty, the way Isadora saw human worth as something determined by bank accounts and zip codes. I want her transferred to night shifts. Isadora continued, oblivious to the change in Silas's expression. Away from Elowen. Better yet, find a reason to let her go entirely. There are plenty of cleaning services that don't come with complications. Silas felt something fundamental shift inside him, like tectonic plates moving after years of dangerous pressure. The woman sitting in his office wasn't the person he thought he knew. Or maybe she was exactly who she had always been, and he had simply been too blind to see it. He thought back to their first meeting at a charity auction 18 months ago, just 3.5 years after Sarah's death, when his grief was still raw and his judgment clouded by loneliness. Isadora had seemed so interested in his work, so understanding of his grief. But now he could see the calculated nature of every conversation, every gesture of sympathy. She had researched him thoroughly, learned exactly what buttons to push, what vulnerabilities to exploit. The grieving widower with a daughter and a fortune, he had been a perfect target. That afternoon, after Isadora left, Silas did something he rarely did. He checked his emails sent folder, prompted by a nagging feeling that something was wrong. What he found made his blood run cold, an email he never remembered sending, withdrawing Elowen from her beloved art program. The timestamp showed it was sent during last week's gala, when his phone had been left unattended during investor meetings. I'll consider it, he said finally, his voice carefully neutral, though he had already made his decision. Isadora smiled triumphantly, kissing his cheek, before floating out of the office in a cloud of expensive perfume and misplaced confidence. She had no idea that her words had just signed her own dismissal papers. Alone in his office, Silas began to piece together other moments that suddenly made sense. Isadora's subtle discouragement whenever he planned activities with Elowen, her suggestions that boarding schools might be good for his daughter's independence, the way she always had urgent social obligations whenever Elowen needed attention. It had all been part of a careful campaign to isolate him from his daughter, to make herself indispensable while rendering Elowen invisible. That evening, Silas made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. Instead of going home to his empty penthouse, he returned to the office knowing that Zora would be working the night shift. He found her in the conference room methodically cleaning windows that overlooked the city lights. She worked with the same quiet dignity he had witnessed before, each movement purposeful and precise. Zora, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She turned her dark eyes, registering surprise but not fear. Mr. Warwick, I wasn't expecting you back tonight. I wanted to talk to you, he said, then paused, unsure how to begin. About Elowen. Something flickered in Zora's expression, hope maybe, or careful wariness. She drew this today, Silas said, holding up another picture his daughter had left behind. This one showed two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands, under a sun that looked remarkably like the one Miles had painted. "She's been drawing more lately," Zora observed. "Drawing helps children process their feelings when they don't have words." "What is she trying to process?" Silas asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Zora was quiet for a long moment, her cloth moving steadily across the glass. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of truth delivered with infinite care. "Missing her mother. Missing you. Wondering if she's worth loving when the people who should love her most seem too busy to notice she exists." The words were gentle but devastating precisely because they came without accusation or judgment. They were simply facts delivered by someone who understood the particular loneliness of a child who felt invisible. "I love her," Silas said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've always loved her." "I know," Zora replied, "but loving someone and making them feel loved aren't always the same thing." As if summoned by their conversation, Elowen appeared in the doorway, having sneaked out of bed and made her way to the office in her pajamas and slippers. "Daddy," she said uncertainly. "Why are you here?" For a moment, the three of them stood in tableau, father-daughter, and the woman who seemed to be the only one who understood what they needed to find their way back to each other. "I came to see you," Silas said, kneeling down to Elowen's level for the first time in months. "I've been doing a terrible job of that lately, haven't I?" Elowen's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice raw with emotion. "Can you help me remember how to be your daddy again?" The answer came not in words, but in the way Elowen threw herself into his arms, holding on like someone who had been drowning and finally found something solid to grasp. Zora watched the reunion with quiet satisfaction, understanding that some victories were measured not in grand gestures, but in the simple act of two hearts finding their way back to each other. The penthouse that had once felt like a symbol of success now seemed like a mausoleum of missed opportunities. Silas sat in his home office, surrounded by the detritus of a life lived according to other people's expectations, awards he barely remembered earning, photographs from social events that had felt important at the time, documents that represented millions of dollars, but somehow felt worthless. On his desk lay three things that actually mattered: Elowen's drawing of their family, Miles's painting of the sunset, and a letter he had found that afternoon tucked behind some files in his desk drawer. Sarah's letter. His wife's handwriting was as familiar as his own heartbeat, every loop and curve a reminder of late-night grocery lists and love notes tucked into his briefcase. But these words were different, final, urgent, written by someone who knew she was running out of time to say what mattered most. "My dearest Silas, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. I know how much you love me, how much you'll hurt when I'm not here anymore. But I need you to promise me something. Don't let grief make you forget to live. Elowen will need you more than ever. She'll need bedtime stories and scraped-knee kisses and someone to tell her she's beautiful when she feels ordinary. She'll need her father, not just someone who pays the bills. I know you'll want to work harder to build bigger walls against the pain, but walls keep out more than hurt. They keep out joy, too. Don't let anyone convince you that success matters more than showing up for our daughter. Love isn't something you postpone until later. It's something you choose every day in small moments that feel ordinary, but end up being everything. Promise me, Silas. Promise me you won't let anyone come between you and our girl. Forever yours, Sarah." The letter shook in his hands as 5 years of suppressed grief crashed over him like a tsunami. He had failed in trying to protect himself from the pain of loss. He had lost the most important thing Sarah had left behind, their daughter's childhood. her trust, her belief that she was worthy of his attention. The sound of the front door slamming jolted him from his spiral of regret. Isadora's voice echoed through the penthouse sharp with irritation. "Silas, we need to discuss the wedding venue. The Blackstone is being difficult about the deposit, and I need you to make some calls." She appeared in his doorway like a storm system, her beauty undimmed, but somehow different when viewed through the lens of clarity. How had he missed the calculation in her eyes, the way her smile never quite reached them? "We need to talk," he said quietly, still holding Sarah's letter. "Of course, darling. About the venue. About Alowan. About last night. About the woman you want me to fire." Isadora's expression shifted, her political instincts recognizing danger. "Silas, you're obviously tired. Why don't we discuss this tomorrow when you're thinking more clearly?" "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," he replied, standing to face her. "Tell me about the email you sent to Elowen's school." The color drained from Isadora's face. "What email?" "The one withdrawing her from the art program she loves. The one you sent without consulting me." Isadora's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "The child was wasting time with those silly drawings. I was helping her focus on more important things." "Important to whom? To her future, to your reputation. Do you want people thinking your daughter is some kind of artist?" The disdain in her voice when she said the word artist was like a physical slap. This woman had looked at his daughter's joy and seen something to be stamped out, something embarrassing. "What else have you done?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "What other decisions have you made about my daughter without my knowledge?" Isadora rallied, switching tactics. "I've been trying to help you, Silas. You're so busy with work, someone needs to manage Elowen's upbringing. Children need structure, discipline. They need to understand their place in the world." "And what place is that?" "Out of the way." Isadora snapped her composure, finally cracking completely. "Do you think I want to play stepmother to some needy little girl? I signed up to marry a successful man, not to babysit his emotional baggage." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Emotional baggage. That's how she saw Elowen, not as a child who had lost her mother too young, not as a little girl who needed love and security, but as an inconvenience to be managed. "And Zora?" Silas asked. "The woman you want me to fire, what exactly has she done wrong?" "She's getting ideas above her station, filling Elowen's head with nonsense about being special, encouraging her ridiculous art obsession. She's a cleaning woman, Silas, not a member of this family." "This family," Silas repeated slowly. "Tell me, Isadora, what do you think this family is?" "It's you and me," she replied without hesitation. "Your money, my connections, building something powerful together. Elowen can fit in around the edges, but she can't be the center of everything. I won't live in the shadow of a dead woman's memory or her needy child." The truth was finally out, ugly and undeniable. This woman he had thought he loved, thought he wanted to marry, saw his daughter as competition for his attention and resources. She saw Sarah's memory as an obstacle to be overcome rather than a legacy to be honored. "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me. Get out of my house. Get out of our lives. We're done." Isadora's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally calculating fury. "You'll regret this, Silas. You think that little cleaning woman will make you happy? You think choosing a daughter over a wife is going to fulfill you?" She grabbed the contract for her latest interior design project from his desk, a multi-million-dollar hotel redesign that had been her ticket to the top tier of Chicago's design world, and tore it in half. There goes your connection to the Hartwell account, she snarled. I hope your precious daughter is worth losing everything. She's worth more than everything, Silas replied without hesitation. That's what you never understood. After Isadora left, taking her fury and her threats with her, Silas sat alone with Sarah's letter and the torn remnants of a contract that had once seemed important. The silence felt different now, not empty but full of possibility. He had a daughter to reconnect with, amends to make, and a woman to thank for helping him find his way back to what actually mattered. Some bridges, when they burn, light the way forward, instead of leaving you stranded in the dark. Chicago Memorial Hospital at dawn carried the particular quiet of a place where hope and desperation lived side by side. In the pediatric wing, Miles Whitlock lay connected to machines that beeped and hummed with the rhythm of borrowed time. His breathing was more labored now, each inhale a visible effort that made his small chest rise and fall like a bird with a broken wing. Zora sat beside his bed, her hand covering his fragile fingers, reading from a worn book of fairy tales. She had been there all night watching over him, as she had every night for weeks, knowing that time was running out faster than her ability to earn the money for his surgery. "Mama," Miles whispered, his voice barely audible over the medical equipment. "Tell me about the prince again." "Which prince, baby?" "The one who saves people. The one who remembers how to see the good things." Zora's throat tightened with unshed tears, but she smiled for her son. "Iquaxa. Well, once upon a time, there was a prince who forgot how to see magic. He was so busy protecting his castle that he forgot about the people inside it who needed him." She was interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Silas stood in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. He held a large bouquet of flowers in one hand and what appeared to be a legal document in the other. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said quietly. "I hoped I might speak with you for a moment." Zora glanced at Miles, who had dozed off during the story, then stepped into the hallway with Silas. The fluorescent hospital lights made everyone look fragile, but there was something different about Silas now, an openness in his expression that hadn't been there before. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble, "for everything. For not seeing what was happening, for not protecting Elowen, for not recognizing what you were trying to do for our family." "Mr. Warwick, Silas," he corrected gently. "And please let me finish. I found something yesterday." He pulled Sarah's letter from his jacket pocket. "My wife, she knew this day would come. She tried to warn me about exactly what I ended up doing." Zora read the letter with the reverence of someone who understood the weight of a mother's final words. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "She loved you both very much," she said softly. "She did. And I dishonored that love by letting fear make me a stranger to my own daughter." Silas paused, gathering courage for what he needed to say next. "Zora, I know you've been struggling with Miles's medical expenses. I know you've been working extra shifts, taking on additional jobs, trying to save enough for his surgery." Zora's spine straightened slightly, her pride a protective wall. "I can handle my family's needs." "I know you can," Silas replied. "You've been handling everyone's needs, including mine and Elowen's, when you should have been focusing on your son. But I'm hoping you'll let me help." He held out the document he had been carrying. "I've spoken with Dr. Patterson. Miles's surgery has been scheduled for tomorrow morning. All expenses will be covered by the Warwick Foundation, a charitable fund I established in Sarah's memory, but never properly used." Zora stared at the papers, her hands trembling slightly. "I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," Silas said firmly. "It's a debt. You saved my relationship with my daughter. You reminded me what kind of father I wanted to be, what kind of man Sarah married. This is me trying to balance the scales." For a long moment, they stood in the hospital corridor. Two parents who understood the weight of loving someone more than your own life. Finally, Zora nodded, accepting not just the help, but the spirit in which it was offered. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," he replied, "for seeing what I couldn't see, for protecting Elowen when I failed to, for being the bridge that brought us back to each other." The next evening, after Miles's successful surgery, Silas returned home. He had spent the day at the hospital watching Zora during Miles's surgery. When Dr. Patterson emerged with news of success, Silas witnessed overwhelming relief and gratitude transform a mother's face. "The procedure went better than hoped," Dr. Patterson had explained. "We removed the damaged lung tissue and reconstructed the airways successfully. With proper follow-up care and respiratory therapy, Miles should have normal lung function within 6 months." Silas had quietly arranged for the best pediatric therapists in Chicago to work with Miles, along with comprehensive care for years to come. "Daddy," Elowen said, when he walked in, "will you draw with me?" The request was simple, but it carried the weight of forgiveness and hope. Silas sat down beside his daughter, picking up a blue crayon with hands that had signed million-dollar contracts, but had forgotten how to create simple joy. "What should we draw?" he asked. "Our family," Elowen replied without hesitation. "But not just me and you. Miss Zora and Miles, too. They're part of us now, aren't they?" Silas looked at his daughter. Really looked at her, seeing Sarah's eyes and spirit, but also something uniquely Elowen. His daughter had a capacity for love that humbled him, an ability to expand the definition of family, to include anyone who showed up with kindness. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're part of us now." As they drew together, Elowen chattering about colors and asking about his day, Silas felt something he hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Not the hollow satisfaction of professional achievement, but the deep, abiding peace that came from being exactly where you belonged, doing exactly what mattered most. The rebuilding wasn't instant. There were moments when Elowen still flinched, when he spoke conditioned by months of feeling unwanted. Silas caught himself reaching for his phone instead of listening to her school stories. But they were both committed to reconnection. They established new rituals: breakfast together every morning, Saturday afternoon, art sessions, bedtime stories that became conversations about her mother. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Isadora's departure, when Elowen had nightmares about abandonment. "I'm scared you'll go away too," she whispered one night. Instead of quick reassurances, Silas took her hand and spoke truth. "I'm scared too, sweetheart. I'm scared I've missed so much of your growing up that I don't know how to be your daddy anymore. But I'm not going anywhere. Even when I mess up, I'm staying right here with you." The picture they created together was imperfect stick figures with uneven smiles under a lopsided sun, but it was beautiful because it was theirs. It was a family portrait drawn by hands that were learning to reach for each other again, hearts that were remembering how to be open. Later that night, Silas tucked Elowen into bed and read her a story, not because he had to, but because he wanted to, because he was finally understanding that these moments weren't interruptions to his important work. They were the important work. "Daddy," Elowen said sleepily as he turned off her bedroom light, "are you going to stay home tomorrow too?" "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "I'm going to be here." "Good," she murmured, already drifting toward sleep. "I missed you. I missed you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." What happens when you finally understand that the life you've been chasing has been keeping you from the life you actually want. Lincoln Park on a Saturday morning in late spring was a symphony of ordinary miracles, children's laughter mixing with birdsong, the smell of fresh grass and blooming flowers. Families scattered across the green space like colorful prayers of hope. Zora sat on a blanket spread beneath an oak tree watching Miles chase butterflies with the unbounded energy of a child who had been given his life back. The surgery had been successful beyond even the doctor's most optimistic projections. Her son's laugh, clear and strong, was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. "Miss Zora," Elowen's voice called across the park as she ran toward them, Silas following at a more leisurely pace. The little girl had blossomed in the weeks since Isadora's departure. Her smile came easier now. Her art had exploded into vibrant expressions of joy and family and hope. "Look what I brought," Elowen announced, pulling out a sketchbook filled with drawings. "I want to show Miles my pictures of our adventures." The two children settled on the blanket together, Miles marveling at Elowen's artistic talent, while she explained each drawing with the serious intensity of a museum curator. There was something magical about watching them together, the way they had instantly understood each other, bonded by their shared experience of illness and healing, of being children who had learned too early that life could be fragile, but had somehow maintained their capacity for wonder. Silas lowered himself onto the blanket with a contentment that was new but growing stronger each day. He had made significant changes in his life, stepped back from certain business ventures, hired additional staff to manage the day-to-day operations, restructured his schedule around what mattered most. The financial impact had been minimal, but the personal impact had been revolutionary. "How is he really doing?" Silas asked Zora quietly, watching Miles demonstrate a cartwheel he had learned in physical therapy. "Better than anyone dared hope," Zora replied, her voice rich with gratitude. "Dr. Patterson says his lung function is improving ahead of schedule. He'll need monitoring for years, but the prognosis is excellent." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two parents who understood the particular joy of watching children play when you had feared you might lose the chance forever. "Zora," Silas said eventually, "I have something I want to discuss with you." She turned to look at him, curiosity and slight wariness in her expression. "I've been thinking about the office manager position at Warwick Industries," he continued. "The one we've been trying to fill for months. It's a good job, flexible hours, excellent benefits, room for growth. The person would essentially run the administrative side of things, be my right hand for the day-to-day operations." Zora's eyes widened slightly. That sounds like a wonderful opportunity for whoever gets it." "I'm hoping that person might be you," Silas said simply. "If you're interested, if you think it might be something you'd want to do." The offer hung in the air between them, significant, not just for the job itself, but for what it represented: recognition, opportunity, a chance for Zora to use her intelligence and capabilities in ways that had been denied to her by circumstance and limited options. "I don't have office experience," she said carefully, though this wasn't entirely true. Before Miles's illness forced her to take whatever work she could find, Zora had been pursuing a business degree at Chicago State University, completing 3 years before financial constraints made continuing impossible. She had worked as an administrative assistant for a small nonprofit until their funding cuts eliminated her position. "You have something more valuable," Silas replied. "You have wisdom, integrity, and the ability to see what's really important. You managed to reorganize my entire life in a matter of weeks, without me even realizing it was happening. And Thane mentioned you've handled complex scheduling and budget tracking at your previous jobs. I think you can handle our administrative operations." The truth was, Silas had been thinking about this offer for weeks. He had watched Zora navigate complex family dynamics with grace, had seen her manage multiple responsibilities while maintaining her principles under pressure. During Miles's surgery, he had observed her asking pointed, intelligent questions to the medical team, ensuring she understood every aspect of her son's care. These weren't the actions of someone who lacked capability. They were the actions of someone who had never been given the opportunity to show her full potential. There would be a transition period, he continued. Bada Thane has agreed to mentor you through the administrative systems, and I've arranged for you to take some business management courses if you're interested. The company will cover all educational expenses. Zora was quiet for a long moment, considering not just the practical implications, but the symbolism. A year ago, she had been scrubbing floors and counting pennies, praying for miracles that seemed impossible. Now she was being offered not just a job, but a career, not just survival, but the possibility of genuine prosperity. Yes, she said finally, her voice steady but her eyes bright with possibility. Yes, I would like that very much. Good, Silas smiled. We'll start Monday. Thane will be thrilled. He's been handling more administrative work than his job description technically covers. As they talked about logistics and schedules, Miles and Elowen had moved on to a new game. Elowen was teaching Miles how to draw pictures in the dirt, with sticks, showing him the game her mother had taught her years ago. Mama always said this game made everything better. Elowen explained seriously to Miles. You draw something sad, and then you draw something happy right next to it, and the happy part makes the sad part less scary. Miles nodded solemnly, understanding instinctively. He drew a stick figure lying in a hospital bed, then beside it, the same figure running and playing. Elowen added her own contribution, a stick figure standing alone, then surrounded by other figures holding hands. See, she said, the sad parts don't go away, but they're not the whole story anymore. Zora felt tears prick her eyes as she watched the children, understanding that they were witnessing something profound. Two young souls who had found each other across the divide of circumstance and created their own healing through simple connection. She's remarkable, Silas said softly, following her gaze. They both are. Children are resilient, Zora replied. They forgive so easily, love so freely. They teach us things we forget as adults. What have they taught you? Zora considered the question seriously. That family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about showing up. Sometimes it's about choosing to love someone even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when you don't know how it's going to work out. As the afternoon wore on, the four of them settled into an easy rhythm of conversation and comfortable silence. Miles fell asleep against Zora's shoulder, exhausted from his first full day of real play in months. Elowen curled up next to Silas, sketching in her notebook, while he read emails on his phone with one hand and stroked her hair with the other. The scene was ordinary, in the most extraordinary way, a makeshift family created not by law or blood, but by choice, circumstance, and the simple decision to show up for each other when it mattered most. As the sun began to set, painting the park in shades of gold and amber, Elowen looked up from her drawing. Miss Zora, she said quietly, I made something for you. She held out a picture, 4 figures standing in front of a house holding hands under a rainbow. Above them, in careful 10-year-old handwriting, she had written, Our Family. Zora took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, understanding that she was holding more than paper and crayon. She was holding acceptance, belonging, love offered without conditions or expectations. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's perfect. I put you next to Daddy, Elowen explained, pointing to the figures, because you make him smile the way Mama used to. And I put Miles next to me because he's like the little brother I always wanted. Silas met Zora's eyes over Elowen's head, and something passed between them, an understanding that this wasn't just about the children anymore, wasn't just about healing old wounds or fulfilling obligations. This was about four people who had found each other across the chaos of loss and circumstance and discovered that they fit together in ways none of them had expected. "You know," Silas said as they packed up their picnic preparing to head home, "I was thinking we might want to make this a weekly tradition, Saturday afternoons in the park." "Can we miss Zora?" Elowen asked eagerly. "Can we come back next week?" "I think," Zora said, looking around at the faces that had become her whole world. "That sounds like the perfect plan." As they walked back to Silas's car, Miles riding on his shoulders while Elowen chattered excitedly about their next adventure, Zora felt something she hadn't experienced since her mother's death years earlier, the deep, abiding peace that came from being exactly where you belonged. The path that had brought them together had been paved with loss and struggle, mistakes and second chances. But standing here now, watching the man who had learned to be a father again, the children who had found healing in each other's friendship, Zora understood that sometimes the most beautiful stories were the ones that began with broken pieces and patient hands willing to put them back together. This wasn't the ending. It was the beginning. The beginning of a family that chose each other, a love that grew from kindness and resilience, a home built not on foundations of obligation, but on the bedrock of showing up day after day for the people who mattered most. Some miracles, Zora realized, didn't arrive in flashes of light or dramatic reversals of fortune. Some miracles were built quietly, one small act of love at a time, until suddenly you looked around and discovered that your entire world had been transformed by the simple decision to see the humanity in everyone you met. Epilogue 6 months later. The Warwick Industries Charity Gala celebrated community partnerships and employee achievements. Zora, now operations manager, had featured stories of employees who overcame challenges. Miles's artwork decorated the programs, bright paintings capturing his journey from illness to recovery. Elowen's illustrations filled the auction catalog, her confidence blooming under her father's attention. Silas addressed the crowd. "This year we learned our greatest assets aren't technology or market position. They're the people who show up every day with dedication and compassion." As applause filled the room, Zora felt Miles slip his hand into hers, while Elowen leaned against Silas. They had traveled far from that night of harsh fluorescent lights and casual cruelty. Now they stood in warm light, reflecting genuine celebration. The future stretched ahead, not perfect, but full of possibility, where kindness had proven stronger than manipulation, and four people who found each other across circumstance had created something beautiful and lasting. In the months that followed, Isadora's reputation crumbled. Former clients canceled contracts after learning of her treatment of a child. Margaret Thorne from the Children's Arts Foundation was particularly vocal about what she witnessed. When Marcus Hartwell learned the full story, he ensured other developers knew exactly who they were dealing with. She eventually left Chicago entirely, her dreams dissolved by the very cruelty she thought would clear her path. Zora's transition wasn't without challenges. The first month was overwhelming, learning new systems, managing budgets, but her natural intelligence and emotional insight proved invaluable. Her suggestions for better communication and flexible scheduling improved productivity while boosting morale throughout the organization. Zora thrived in her new role at Warwick Industries, bringing the same patience and insight to business operations that she had shown in healing a broken family. Miles grew strong and healthy, his medical team amazed by his recovery. And Elowen, beautiful, resilient Elowen, continued to create art that captured the joy of a childhood finally allowed to unfold in safety and love.